Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's dive into today's episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode, another one of live coaching, which I'm personally very excited about. And we have Llano with us today. And she is going to tell you a little bit more about why she came to the party today. And then we're going to jump into coaching her essentially on how to have the confidence to ask for what you're worth. Definitely a topic that is very hot on the list of things that people want to know about. So I'll turn it over to you, Alice.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I think I'm mostly needing help with, my background is in program management. I've had a number of very successful roles, and I always end up when I'm currently looking for a new position. And I've noticed recently that when I'm talking to recruiters, and I know this about myself in the past, but when I'm talking to recruiters and they ask me, what salary is it that you are looking for? Something inside me just turns into jelly, and I don't know what it is. I don't know why I have this aversion to talking about salary. I'm a relatively confident person in the workplace, but when it comes to asking for what I think I'm worth, I start to get very wishy-washy about it. And I typically try and put it over onto them and like, well, do you have a salary band that is for this role? And then they typically will go, no, we don't have any information, or why don't you tell me what you're looking for? And then I start to already, second guess myself and go, well, I like to think about things as, as an overall package with like equity and benefits. And instead of just being like, I want this much, I think I'm worth this much, I start going, well, somewhere in the region of, I'm going to make this up completely, but somewhere in the region of like 250 to 270. I've never made that much money, by the way, but this is my dream, obviously. And then I'm like, and then they're like, oh, well, that might be a little bit out of our range. And then I find myself going, well, we can talk about the package, and it's not always about the money, it's about the job too. And I just find myself just backtracking into this like place where I feel like then I'm not being confident about my worth, right? So I'm not being like solid on my ask. Mm-hmm. And I'm not exuding any confidence whatsoever that I'm worth that much. And so then I feel like I also put myself in a position where they could lowball me when it comes to the offer, because I'm so like, and then I don't refuse to continue on a track where they are paying less than I think I'm worth. I then start to compromise and will continue down the interview process, even though it's not going to pay me what I think I'm worth. So I need help.
Well, I'm so glad that you came. And by the way, thank you for your vulnerability and doing this in a public forum. By the way, you're helping many other women, because it's very important for me to impart that you are not alone in this. That I hear this so often, and the part about the backtracking and all of that, well, maybe, and I do think that is so much about how we are often as women as well, wanting to accommodate and make everybody feel better. And then there is something that blocks us a lot of the times, especially around money. So what I'm curious about for you, if you were to think about what would you most want to shift and be different the next time you have one of these conversations with somebody, what would that be?
I mean, I think it would I think I have to have this, I have to have a range in my head and I have to stick to it, is one thing. Like I need to just pick that range. And then for me, it's more like how I turn up, right? How do I, when I have that conversation, it's like, oh, I have this down, I have a, I don't know, like a little cheat sheet of things that I know I can say that are going to sound confident. And once I kind of get that practiced, I think I'll come across as confident, my body language will be confident, my intonation and my voice will be confident. And then I think I'll feel much better about, sticking and not compromise, but sticking to what I think I'm worth. And I don't think that I'm over, like, I don't think I overstretch what I think I'm worth in terms of, compensation. I'd never ask for the moon. I'm not, I don't have delusions of grandeur and think that I'm, worth $500,000 a year. So I just really want
to very well be. You might very well be, but maybe let's make sure. Yeah.
But I think it's about how I show up in the conversation, and that someone comes across, somebody on the other side of the conversation is, oh, I've seen her resume. She has a ton of experience. She's super confident. She's definitely worth that.
Well, and that's a really good reminder of the consistency that obviously for all of us, and if you think about personal brand, which we're all reflecting all the time, how are we showing up on our resume, as well as even things like social media in any situation, whether it's probably thinking most LinkedIn, most people probably for the corporate world. But also then, like you said, you want, when the person comes to the table, I think of myself as a past hiring manager, that there's nothing more disappointing than having somebody come across as much less confident than the way their resume comes across. Because of course we all look forward to, oh, I can't wait to hear about this person and from this person. And so when you think about having that consistency in your brand, that same thing is in your presence and how you show up. But of course, we can have these skills. Like Alice, you already speak with confidence in your voice and that kind of thing. Obviously, I've never seen you or heard you in a situation where you're negotiating and you might be pulling back. So to me, it's just simply stepping into what you already do, but of course, in this different environment. And that's another thing that I always tell people, that generally speaking, most of us can't compartmentalize habits, but we can. And what I mean by that, by the way, is things like, oh, well, let's say I'll bring this strength when I really need it, and these higher stakes presentation, as opposed to remembering that every time we speak is an opportunity to practice and be consistent with your voice and your projection. And obviously we have to flex to different situations that we're in. But if we can think about this as, this is now simply going to become part of who I am, so that it almost like another thought here could be a mantra or an affirmation for yourself, is something like, I always show up with confidence when talking about money or when talking about what I'm worth. So that would be one idea. But what I'd like to do right now, Alice, and by the way, for anybody listening, we didn't plan out this conversation at all. All we talked about is what she wanted coaching on. So all of this is really on the fly. But what I think would be really useful, Alice, is a role play right now where you be the potential hiring manager asking the questions, and I'm going to be the ideal you.
Okay.
Stepping into what that might look like. And we'll just experiment with this. Unless you feel strongly and you say, you know what, let's just have me jump in. What would you prefer?
No, because I'll just end up doing the same thing I always do.
Okay.
I'm looking for different ways to not just show up, but also like say things. And I know that you're really good at this, like finding alternative ways to say things that help bring you confidence. So I would love to be on the other side of the table and see, like, because you are really good at that. So so yeah, I'm happy to
We'll see.
play the
We'll see how it
interview
plays out.
hiring
All right, so
manager.
we'll do this. We'll do take one with me, and then we'll switch roles.
Okay.
Okay. So then
All
you can
right.
get some ideas. And just again, for everybody listening, we're just doing this organically and we'll see how it goes. I don't even have this plan in my head as well. Okay. So let's pretend what would you say? We're at the final stages. Is that probably pretty typical? And you're going to ask me,
Um,
or you give me the scenario.
it's not. I mean, it's even at the stage where I'm talking to the recruiter and they're asking me because what I like to do is, I don't really want to. I've been bitten in the past where I've gone through the whole hiring process and then you get to you've done all the interviews and they're like, yeah, we'd love to have you and here's the offer, and you're like, oh wow, and we never discussed money. So I always like to just be discussing money up front because I need to know whether it's even in the range. But
Yeah.
yet I still just end up backing down and compromising. So
Okay.
uh, even in the recruiting phase, and pretty much mostly in the recruiting phase, and a lot of recruiters have actually, finally cottoned on that it's really not worth bringing people through the whole process if there's not an alignment on salary expectation.
Okay. That sounds great. So then for the record, also for people listening, the number here is not what's important. It's simply how that I'm going to be showing up differently,
Right,
potentially.
right,
Okay.
right.
All right.
Okay.
So why don't you go ahead? So do you want to be a recruiter?
Yes, I'll
Okay.
be a recruiter. So let's assume that we've kind of finished the interview. I've told you about the benefit packages, and there's unlimited PTO, and we have happy hours, and everything sounds really wonderful. So one last question, Karen. I wanted to find out what your salary expectations are for this role.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm very excited to hear, I mean, all the things that are all of the perks. And thanks for asking, by the way, about the salary right up front, because I have found in the past that sometimes things are very different from what I expect. And we want, of course, to be on the same page. So thank you for that right away. First question that I have, is there a salary range for this position?
Yeah, I haven't really been given one yet. I'm waiting for them to, we kind of moved really quickly on this role, and so I'm still waiting for the HR team to kind of do their research and come up with the salary band. But I'm curious if you have, any expectation on what you would want.
Yeah, I do actually. So just to be very straightforward with you, I'm looking for somewhere in the high 200,000s is what my goal is.
Okay. Well, I think that, I mean, I don't know. I haven't seen the salary range. I suspect that might be, above the top end of the range.
Mhm. Well, I
So
can
I don't
go.
know.
Sure. No, that's fair. And I totally understand that. I get that. I have to say, based on my years of experience combined with the where I've been at and just the what I've been doing in the last few years in particular, make me a really good fit for this role. So I'm really confident in what I've done, what I can bring to the table. And for that reason, that's why I'm asking for that range. And I would certainly love to continue on in the process and also want to get your perspective on that at the same time. But what I've found in the past with other roles is that sometimes people will say it's a certain amount and then it changes. But obviously, I respect the process, definitely want to honor whatever the rules of engagement, for lack of a better term, is, or lack of a better term, and continue on if that works out. So that would be my thought on that.
Okay, well, great. That sounds awesome. What I'll do is find out what the salary range is, and if we think if I find out it's really outside of the ballpark of what you're expecting, I'll definitely circle back with you to see if you still want to continue.
Sure.
But for the time being, yeah, I'll go away and do some research for you.
That sounds great. Well, and then a couple of things for you to know as my recruiter, of course, in this situation. number one, as you know, money isn't always the form, the, the, the only form of compensation. Another thing that I really value is flexible time as well as time off. And I know that there's a lot of perks that you've already spoke of, but if there is something where, like, I'd be certainly willing to take less money if there were more, if there was balanced out with more flex time or specifically time off, that would be something I'd be willing to look at. And of course, we're not even at this stage yet, but we could talk about a sign-on bonus as well. That could be an option. Or thinking about, okay, depending upon where they might land, and if I feel like I still really want to do it, then I would think, okay, well, what might potentially they be able to do in a 6-month period if I help them with the results that I've promised to help them with.
Okay. All right. That's good to know. That's
So I think I just, yeah, I want you to know that there's a lot of ideas there that I certainly have, and want you to know that I'd be happy to brainstorm as well, because I know for you, you want to fill these roles. Obviously, that's important to you for your bottom line too. So I want to help support you in that. As long if it's a win-win for all of us, I think that's a great way to go.
okay, great. Well, I'll get back to you soon.
That sounds good. Thank you so much.
Wow.
All right, time out. All right. So what is your thought on that, Alice? Just tell me your response and reactions to any of that.
um, I mean, it showed flexibility, but at the same time, you were very sure of like your value. But you showed flexibility in finding other ways to bring the compensation up to something that would be acceptable to both parties. So it kind of showed some creativity. And I have done that in the past, but where I've negotiated over, hey, I don't like the salary is really isn't there, equity doesn't pay my bills. And so can you, cut some of the equity out to up my salary by $10,000 or whatever. Um, but being able to kind of have that in my head and, have some kind of playbook that I can just go through. And it kind of made me feel good that, you had empathy for the fact that most recruiting, challenges, and I know this because I've worked with recruiting people, is the back and forth over salary, and that takes a long time, and that it's difficult for the recruiter to keep going back and forth and doing that negotiation. And so it felt like you were supporting me and helping me in my, venture to fill this position, but at the same time, still very like not compromising on what you felt you were worth.
Oh,
So
good.
I'm
Yep.
definitely gonna listen back to this. I wrote some notes, but I'm definitely gonna listen back because the way you put it was very, I mean, that's why you're just so good at that. So that was
Oh,
awesome.
well, thank you. Well, I appreciate that. And I wouldn't be a good coach if I didn't reverse the roles. So I understand, yes, you could listen back, all of that, but it's so much better when you actually embody it in your own muscle memory. So I want to do a reverse role if you're okay with that.
All right, we'll try it. I might embarrass myself, but
Well, I'm so happy that you came to this with an open mind and you want to grow. So first of all, you're taking one for the team, as they say, with all of the other women that are listening to this. So it's awesome. And it's the best way for you to really embody this. Okay.
right.
So I'll be the recruiter and we'll go from there. Sound good?
Okay, yes. All
Okay.
right.
Just remember, Alice, I just want to encourage you to know this is a playground. It's an
Mhm,
experience, a laboratory. So we're just trying out different things. So
mhm.
nothing's at stake here. All right. So, all right, Alice, there's been all these amazing perks about the role. So what's your salary range before we go any further?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I'm glad we're talking about that up front. I've definitely had issues in the past where we've gone too far down the road and then the salary expectation hasn't really aligned. And I definitely don't want to be wasting anybody's time the expectation is outside of the band. So so thank you for asking me that. I think that based on my experience, I have a ton of experience. I feel like I'd be an incredible fit in this role and bring some value. I've done a lot of the work that you need to be done, and I think I'd be able to hit the ground running and add value very quickly. So given my experience and how long I've been doing this, I would be looking for a salary of between 180 and $200,000. So yeah, that's kind of the expectation that I have.
Okay. Well, I will say that's probably over. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation now. But are you willing at all to compromise on that? Like, or would you be willing to go lower than that?
Well, I really do think that I would bring the value, and I think that I'm worth that salary. I do, I will say that I value, time off and flexibility. So I have, two kids, and they're very young, and so being able to be flexible around, having flexible time would be something that we could talk about, or additional time off. I'm also really open to something like a signing bonus, if that's an option to kind of bring up my salary, or if there's an opportunity for us to kind of really nail down an agreement on, once I'm in the role for 6 months, there would be a guaranteed kind of salary increase around that to kind of bring me up to where I would want to be. So I'm
Okay.
definitely open to kind of getting creative and looking at other ways to kind of get what I want and allow you to fill the role with the right person.
Okay. Well, that's really good to know. And if that, just putting it all out there, if none of that was available, would you be willing to entertain less?
I really don't think so, because I feel like I really bring that value to an organization, and I would just be, compromising my worth. I think if I took less than that, that would be really hard for me.
Okay. Well, thank you for your clarity. It's a very helpful. I appreciate it. All
All
right.
right.
Nice job. So let's do a quick self-assessment. What did you think? What did you do well? Let's start there. What did you do well?
Well, I felt like I didn't compromise, like you did. I kind of followed your framework of
Mhm.
offering creative options, and so I felt like I did that, and I didn't compromise. Felt like I was pretty confident in how I was saying it. Felt like I said a lot of ums though,
You
and
had a
that,
few in there, but I was
yeah.
really impressed by your confidence in how you first said the range. You weren't hemming and hawing at all. So
No, I normally go, let me see, as if like I've never thought about it before. Like it's the first time
exactly.
anyone's ever asked me that question.
Well,
Oh, good.
so much of confidence, right, is that act as if sometimes we have to put forth the confidence before we 100% feel it ourselves. So I think that's great. So what I want to do is I'd like to give you some ideas for what
Great.
would make it even better.
Okay.
The biggest theme that I noticed is some words that minimized you.
Oh, okay.
So you used kinda. I really do. When you said something about with your, and I don't remember now the exact thing, but when you talked about the salary, you said something like, I kinda da 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 da,
Oh, yeah.
as opposed to just that's what I'd like to make.
Yeah.
That's my expectation. And I even think that's my expectation is better language than that's what I'd like to make, because I'd like to make almost sounds a little desperate. Like I'd really like to make that.
Yeah, I hear
Opposed
you.
to this is my expectation and you're very clear. And then so a couple of phrases just to say back to you, which are very similar, all similar. I really do think, and then later you said, I really don't think. So as opposed to simply saying no or yes. For example, I don't remember the first one of what you were responding to when you said, I really do think, but when you said, I really don't think so, as opposed to when I asked you, would you be willing to take less? And
No,
first of all,
unfortunately.
it
Yeah,
was,
just go no.
I mean, I obviously you want to be polite and all of that, but rather than I really don't think so, but to say, no, thanks, that's not going to work for me. Like being totally okay with it. And the more you practice that kind of clarity and confidence, the less you'll have to say things like, I'm worth that salary. Twice you said, I believe I'm worth that. And not that that's a terrible thing, but in my opinion, you can show that you're worth it through the way that you speak and the way that you carry yourself rather than because what can happen sometimes when people say that, and this may or may not be true for you, but it can
Mhm.
come across like you're trying to convince yourself.
Yeah, right. You have to believe it.
Yeah. And then that comes out in the confidence around here's what I am willing to do. I'm willing to look at a sign on bonus, even something 6 months down the line. I'm looking to look at, I really value time off and flex time. So I'm certainly open to other options. But as far as hardcore money, I'm looking for that 180, whatever, range that you
Right.
said.
Yeah.
And also when I was playing you in the role play, I also want anybody listening to know that I was really intentional about not saying a specific number. Like you said, 180 to 200, I think is what you said.
Yeah.
I would recommend that you be more vague than that. Like I said, high 200s or something like that,
Oh, right. Yeah, you did.
because I understand, like most typical negotiations will teach you don't say a number, like don't say a number, but sometimes it's really tough to not because then it just looks like you're completely uncooperative.
Hmm.
So you can still be cooperative, offer a very loose range, and then see what comes back.
Right.
Because as soon as you say 180, if that's even way at the top of their range, that's what they're going to give you. Oh, she'll take
That's
180.
right.
Great.
Right. Yeah.
They're rarely going to give you 200 or even 185 if you're asking for 180.
Yeah. That's
Because
really good.
then when you get more into the conversations with them, you're going to get more specifics. Well, first of all,
Yeah.
you don't need to get that specific with a recruiter until
Right.
it gets further down the line. And then that high 200s or whatever, high hundreds will then become more specific. And
Right.
then that's when you can make a more educated decision when you get closer
Right. Yeah,
actual
that's really good
actual
advice.
offer.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so that's what I would offer. Alice, what else? Anything else before we wrap up?
I don't think so. I think this is great. I've got kind of a framework of how I
Let
want
me
to
stop
say
you.
it.
Instead of kind of a framework.
I have a framework that I can use, and I have some good advice on not narrowing myself down too much and just, I think I have to work on just slowing down so that I don't use those words like kinda and I really think, and not use as much, because I think it just takes away from my confidence or how I sound.
Yeah, it definitely can over time for sure.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
part of it is also how we speak to ourselves because when you say
Mhm.
those things out loud, you're reinforcing. The ums are non-words, obviously, but things like
Mhm.
I kind of have, or I really do think, or the part about your worth, saying that even a couple of times in a brief conversation could take away from your credibility. So that's where continuing to practice and get feedback from both recording yourself as well
Mhm.
as from other people is
Mhm.
really the key to getting better. Having
Right.
conversations like this, doing role plays with people, and also for anybody listening, just know that this is a really good model right here where you're role playing. We're not in this podcast. We're not going to be listening to it back, but we will once it airs. We'll be able to listen to it. So I want to encourage anybody listening too, that if you can do a role play with somebody and listen to it back, that's a really helpful way to see how you sound. And then also notice, okay, were those ums as distracting as I thought they were? Were those modifiers? How many did I say? All of this is the best way to really see what's the reality. And then you
Yeah.
course correct for the next time.
Yeah. And having it written down as almost just a cheat sheet of key points
Yes.
will allow me to be more focused in what I'm saying, and then say less ums and less things that are gonna detract from my confidence. So incredible.
Yeah. Well, good. So
30-minute fix.
what's the biggest takeaway for you, Alice?
Biggest takeaway is, for me, probably don't give them a range. Do the high 100s. Like, everything else was amazing. Like, all the advice you gave me was amazing. And but I think not giving them a range, and then just being very succinct, like, that's my expectation, not, don't fill the
Yeah.
gaps of anything, because that's when you start to fluff up.
Yes. Well, and I know that this conversation was for talking to a recruiter, but again, for everybody listening, be the one more comfortable with silence.
Mm.
That really is probably the best rule of thumb with negotiation. Once you put a number out there, if you do, or if they put a number out there, use the power of the pause to benefit you. Spend that 1 to 2 seconds where you're thinking,
Yeah.
and allow that to be there, rather than, like you talked about earlier, Alice. So most of us tend to do this. Well, if that's not going to work, then I could entertain something else. And, it's the whole backtracking almost. And then it defeats or sabotages
Mhm.
everything that you spent time on to be confident around in your answer.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, good. Well, for Alice, you are looking for a job. For anybody that does want to reach out to you and has heard this or simply wants to learn more about you, where can we reach you?
You can reach me at Alice Llano, that's ALICELLANO @gmail.com. And I'm looking for a role where I can marry my program management experience, very extensive program management experience, with employee engagement and employee experience role. So thank you so much for giving
You're
me this
welcome.
platform, and
Of
for
course.
helping me through this challenge.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Well, I'm looking forward to hearing about the next part of your adventure around all of this. And I know that you've helped a lot of women today. So thank you for your vulnerability and for your willingness to just jump in and do a role play. As I already said, none of this was planned except for the subject. So thanks for jumping in. All right,
Appreciate
Alice,
this.
have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.